Today's daf, Ches of Erev Tisha B'Av, is daf Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph. So if Kahana comes along in the name of Rav and says, our Mishnah says that if somebody, let's say, lost his ability to speak, he became an ilim, you can communicate with him via a remez. He can indicate with nodding his head, and we learned you have to ask a total of 6 questions. And if he sounds like he's aware of everything, we can go ahead and act as his agent. But we're talking about somebody who just became mute. What about somebody who's deaf and dumb, a chedesh? So we know that a chedesh, if he marries someone while he's a chedesh, Mahatorah, he can't marry anybody. It's only midrabbanan. And therefore, he can also give a get because the Rabbanan, the ones who said he's married, the Rabbanan said he can divorce. But if he, let's say, was married to a woman when he was all right, so if he's married Mahatorah, and then he became totally deaf and dumb, a chedesh, he cannot divorce her. Comes along Rav Kahana Marav, and nodding the head is not going to be good enough. But comes along Rav Kahana Marav and says, but if he can write, because he was before totally aware of full control of his faculties, now he lost it all. If he could prove to us that he's still totally in control, so if he writes down instructions on a piece of paper, that is tantamount to him saying that you should be, I'm pointing you as my shliach. That's a big chiddush of Rav. Says Gemara Ein Aleph on the top of the page. Amar Rav Kahana Rav, and the Gemara will conclude that it's a machlekes Tanoi. Amar Rav Kahana Rav, chedesh sheyochel dam sheksa, but chedesh you can speak through writing. Koisvin he can write. So talking about a case of somebody who was a pikeach when he got married Mahatorah, now he cannot speak. He's a chedesh and he's not metaber, not shemeya. He's not an ilim like an mishnah that he cannot. This is a chedesh, a step much lower than that. If he can prove to us that he's aware of the faculties and he can write, then it is considered as if he gave instructions. If he writes there, if he writes there on the paper, I want you to write a get and write and then give it to my wife, and so on and so forth. He's considered pekech, and you can do it. Amar Rabbi Yosef asked, my kamashla. Our mishnah says you can even nod your head. Of course you can write. Said Rabbi Yosef, my kamashla tanina. We look at our mishnah. If he lost his ability to speak, and they asked him, should we write a get to your wife? But here he nodded his head. We ask him a number of questions, 3 times questions of yes, 3 times questions of no. But if he answered right the right way by nodding his head, he's considered fully aware. So of course, if you can write, it's even better. Wait, talking about our mission is a different case altogether. Our mission is talking about ilim kabrit. Our mission is talking about somebody who's just mute. A person who's mute is totally in control of their faculties. Only a possible problem is he cannot speak. So we say nodding the head. We need to know that he agrees. So nodding the head is good enough. Here the problem is that the chedesh who ain't a shemei, ain't a badaber, cannot hear, cannot speak. We put them together in the same category as a shaitan, not control of his faculties, and therefore we need a much better proof. Nodding head is not going to work. But writing, according to Rav, will. Ilim kami, you're talking about somebody's mute. Shiny ilim. Ilim is very different. The Tanya we learned, if somebody can speak but cannot hear, that's called somebody mute. That's called somebody who's deaf. If he hears but cannot speak, that's somebody's mute. But they both are considered halachically pikchim, just to have a certain handicap. But otherwise, they're fully chayiv and everything. That's the case. It says in the passage, describing so I'm like a chedesh who cannot hear. So the only handicap I have is that I cannot hear. Even like a mute person that cannot open the mouth. Only handicap not opening the mouth. Although in another way, how do I know that ilim means mute? Ilim is made up of words, a construct of 2 words. His words were taken away from him. Okay, so therefore the basis question is not a question. You cannot compare Rav's chiddush to the case of our Mishnah, which is mute, and he's talking about somebody who's totally chiddush. Said to Rabbi Yosef, as we just said, your question is not a question, but I do have a question. But I have a question. The Tanya we learned, it says in the passage, if you are aware of some testimony and you swear in court, I have no testimony to help this person, supporting evidence to help the person out. Turned out to be that you swore false, you have to bring a carbon chatas. So it says, im lo yagid, if you did not reveal the truth, then you have to go ahead and bring carbon chatas. You swore that you don't have anything to say, it turned out to be you're not telling the truth. So otherwise you have a carbon shvur. Now, Practically Elam, but somebody's mute. Any yochel hagid. Somebody mute asked him, "Do you have anything to say about this case?" And he says no. He not said no. Turned out to be that he's a liar. He does not have to bring a carbon. Now, if you're telling me that writing is good enough, so if writing is good enough, so as a chaydish, surely writing is good enough if somebody's an ilim. So how come you're telling me that an ilim can never be chayv? He could be chayv if he writes it down. Can't he write it down? And if Rab is right, why can't he write it down? Yeah. So the Gemara. Now, he doesn't finish asking a Mishnah. You could nod his head. So Tracy already explains. He understood when it comes to a get, all we need to know is whether you agree or not. For example, a woman, she sends a shliach, we don't have to hear her say anything. She just says, as long as we know that she agrees that this person's representative is good enough. All we need is a consent. When it comes to Adis, we need Adis. But your chiddush of Kan Ne'marav is that writing is like speaking. If writing is like speaking, then why can't it apply also to Adis by an ilim if he writes it down? Says the Gemara, Abaye said, Eidos ka'amred, you're talking about Eidos. Eidos is very different. Shiny Eidos is different than Achmon Amar. The Torah says, Mipihem b'lei mipik savam. There we have Exeris HaKosov. Al pi shnayim Eidim yukam dover. It says pi. Through the mouth, it has to be, we have to hear from them and not if they write it down. That is the big machlek of the Rambam and the Ramban, how contracts work. If Mipihem b'lei mipik savam, if Eidim sign a star, how can they work? And the Rambam therefore holds that all stars are only midirabbanan. Because the Eidim are just signing on a piece of paper, and writing is not the same. The Ramban says no, shtaros are different. Rabbi, and his question is, what about getting kedushin to the star? It's mahatayra, and they're writing it down. So he explains how that's different than talking about Eidim who write on a piece of paper their testimony. Anyway, don't bring me a proof from here because Eidim is different. Basically, that's a question. Again, a question. It says Kishem. Just like we investigate him when it comes to Gittin, we're talking about somebody who, in our mission, it says, who lost his ability to speak. He has to nod his head. The same tests we also do. When it comes to business, when it comes to gifts, when he wants to sell his own asset. Well, the AD is when it comes to testimony, as in each case, Yerusha, it comes to inheritance. But one of them is ADs. And it says there, we're talking about somebody who who lost the ability to speak, and yet we question him by nodding his head. Tony Mia says clearly here that he can nod and surely that he can write. So we see Kliu said before that what do you call it? It says that you can write. You just said when it comes to Adis. Adim cannot write because it says mit pihem v'loy mipik savam. Here's a clearly ADs that that we can test somebody who lost the ability to speak. So we see that doesn't matter if we hear from their mouth. Here we're talking about Eidos Isha. We live in Marivambas when a woman husband travels overseas. There we are so lenient because we are sure that Isha Dayak is a mitzvah. She will do her own homework because she knows if she got it wrong and the husband comes back and she married somebody else, all kinds of problems with her second marriage. First can't go back to first marriage. Second, her children might be mamzedim. So it's not just the Eidech, but Eidos there we're very lenient. We don't want it to be in Aguna. So therefore, in that case, there the Rabban allowed, the nodding the head or writing and everything else. The Eidos Isha the Kila Rabban were very lenient. We allow a single aid, we allow a relative, and so on. So this is different. So you might say, okay, but Tony says Yerusha, he can also testify about inheritance. So we see again, we're talking about testifying, and he can do that not just by speaking. Amar Abavu, you said has to be alpi, has to be vocally. Amar Abavu, who said that Yerusha means that he is testifying? It means Yerusha's b'nai have chayr. If he decides he doesn't want his b'chayr to have the full Yerusha, so there are different ways of circumventing that law. One is a matnas body. You give the matana while you're still alive. You can distribute your wealth how you want it, and that's what we're talking about. Distributing his wealth. He doesn't want his firstborn to have a double portion, so he nods his head whatever is accordingly. Anyway, the Gemara says, okay, it says it for business and for gifts. My lavla alma, he's testifying on behalf of somebody else. So again, we see that he can testify, even though he cannot speak. So we're like, no, ledi day. I'm not talking about testifying. We're talking about business, that he can do business or he can give gifts as long of his own assets, as long as he can nod and indicate to us what his intention is. Okay, so going further, make sure I'll ask a question. Chedesh. When it comes to a chedesh, Loy hocha by achad, we don't follow his indications of achak ksiva, or he's jumping around trying to make all kinds of hints as to what he means. It says clearly here that we will not follow what he writes. Only when it comes to matters of metallic portable goods. Not to get, it says clear. You can't get clear on that. The Braisa clearly says when it comes to getting writing down somebody who's a chedesh, you cannot follow what he writes. And yet Rav said, Rav said before, that even somebody who's a chedesh, if he writes, it's good enough. Somebody who's a chedesh, yeah, says the Gemara. And we're talking about a case here is, now we're not talking about a case where he was a chedesh, always a chedesh. Because if he was always a chedesh, then his marriage is only the Rabbanah, then it would have worked. It must be talking about somebody who's married Mahatayda, and then he became a chedesh afterwards. And says clearly he cannot write it down. Kasha and Rav. The Gemara says we concede you're right. The Braisa definitely argues that, but you know, Tanoi, there's a machlekes Tanoim. There's another Tana that agrees with Rav. Or Rav agrees with another Tana. Tana in the Braisa, the will say, when do we say the Braisa here we don't follow by gifting only bechedesh mekadosh? Somebody who's deaf and dumb from the beginning, then we don't follow. We'll soon explain if somebody's deaf and dumb in the beginning, he's only married with the Rabbanon. So married with the Rabbanon, of course, he can get out with a get. But we'll come back to that soon in the Gemara. But a pikeach when it's somebody who's fully aware of his faculties and he's married Mahatayda, and then he lost his ability to speak. And here, he definitely could write. Exactly what Rav said, because he's proven to us that he's still saying. No, but you go back to the original way he was, since originally he was a pikeach, and he proved that he's still pikeach. Okay, so therefore we see clearly about tonight. Now the more digresses. What does Shimon mean when he says v'chedesh mikaray? Then he cannot write. But a chedesh mikaray loik. How do you marry her in the first place? Through indication. So why can't you divorce her the same way? Of course he could. And and so the Gemara says, you're right. If we're talking about chedesh mikol, but if it was his own wife, you're right. Of course he can divorce her. It's not a question. You know, we're talking about over here in with his sister-in-law. What do you mean? Your brother married her Mahatayra, and then if he dies, you have to then marry her. So now she is your wife, and he cannot divorce her at all, because since Mahatayra, how you can divorce her. But if you personally were a pikeach first and then a chedesh, then you could write. Says the Gemara, how did your brother marry this Yibam? Let's analyze that. Your brother also was deaf and dumb, so no, your brother only married Rabbanon, so you took over his place. Of course, you could divorce her. She got married through Remiza, not by speaking, so you could divorce her the same way. Just like that's how she got married, then you'd see us a bit as well. That's how you could divorce her. So one answering more is what our Shuvah says, but by Chedesh it doesn't work. Mikara is talking about a case where your brother was an ordinary person and married her Mehatayra, then he died with no children, so you take over. So you're married to her Mehatayra, and now you cannot divorce her. But if you're a Chedesh, a Pikeach, and then became a Chedesh, then you could. By writing, or we can say in all cases you honest, even if your brother was a chedesh from the beginning, so he's only married to Rabbanan. In this case, you cannot step in and divorce her. You take over. You marry her, but you cannot divorce her. And why not? Well, chedesh only married to Rabbanan because of Gzeira. Well, we're going to allow you to divorce your brother's wife. If he was a chedesh, people will think that you can divorce your brother's wife, even if he was a pikeach. That's what they would think. They would think, oh, it's much easier to divorce her because you never really married her. It's on your brother's wife. Mistakes can happen. But your brother was a chedesh, and he only married her with Rabbanan. But we're not going to allow you to divorce her, because if you allow to divorce her, this case, you divorce her if she's married to a pikech. Says so if you're worried about Gzeda, then Ishanami, how can he divorce his wife? If we're going to allow him to divorce his own wife, if we allow him to divorce his own because he's married to Rabbanan, he can divorce her. Next time he'll divorce his brother's wife, and his brother has to be pikech. Why don't you say that? And it's not like a double gezerah, because isn't that more or less the same idea? Either if your brother's a chedesh or you're the chedesh, the same idea that if you're going to allow you to divorce your brother pikech, you'll divorce your wife as well. If you we should not allow if your brother's a pikech. If we can allow you to divorce your wife, if you're married to a chedesh, why don't you'll divorce your brother's wife, even though he was a pikech at the time? So what are you talking about? It's two different things. Why it says so So the Gemara, it's very easy for people to make an error and see that if you can divorce your brother's wife, even though you're a Chedesh, people don't think about the fact that your brother happened to be a Chedesh when he got married. They just think, oh, you're allowed to marry your brother, you're allowed to divorce your brother's wife. So even if the brother was a Pikech, they think you're allowed to divorce her. But if your brother's wife was a Yevama, but if we allow you to divorce your wife, if you married her while you're a Chedesh, we're not going to make the leap and say, oh, your same applies to your brother's wife. It's two different categories. Everybody understands that. Says the Gemara, but you're telling me that we make a Zeta for the Chedesh, and we got in Chedesh. So you're telling me, your second answer to the Gemara was what? That we're going to make a Zeta, even in the case where your brother was a Chedesh at the time when he married her. It was only the Rabbanon. So technically, you should be able to divorce her, but nevertheless, we don't want you to, because next time, if your brother's a Pikech, you divorce his wife as well. But now, we learned in a Mishnah in Yevamis, where it says over there, Shnei Achin Charoshi. There were two brothers, and both of the brothers were Charoshi. They both were deaf and dumb, so therefore, whoever they married, regardless, is only married with the Rabbanon. And if they happen to be in a Suyin Shteach, he's married to two sisters, and we learned already last time in Yevamis that if one of the brothers dies, so the technical din is that his wife has to marry the brother-in-law, but in this case he can't, because she's a sister of the tzara. So then she walks scot-free. She doesn't need a chalitza. There's no ties whatsoever. So in this case, both brothers were married with Rabbanan, and they were married to two sisters, regardless who the two sisters were, whether pikchas are both intelligent, or both deaf and dumb, or two sisters, achas pikachas, achas chareshes, and one was deaf and one was a pikach. It makes no difference. They're only married with Rabbanan, and both sisters now are considered a sister of a tzara, so therefore neither of them have to do yibum. Or the other way around, the brothers were pikchim, but the two sisters were not. Two sisters, charoshes, who were married to two brothers. Again, they only married to Rabbanon. Pikchim, the two brothers are either both brothers intelligent, they're both deaf and dumb, one was this way, one was that way. Had the pot exactly, they're totally potted. Why they're potted? Because they're the sister of the tzara, of the one who's married to the brother. But if they were not sisters at all, and in this case, the two brothers were charoshin and were married to two separate women, two strangers. One woman and one brother died, so now the other one has to marry the first brother. They can get married. It says clearly here that they can divorce. It means since they're only married, since both brothers were charashim, they're only married to Rabbanon. So that if one of them ends up with the second brother, he can divorce her. So we see clearly what? That we don't make this gezeda from chedesh to pikech. Go back to the first answer. That when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that a chedesh mikora you cannot divorce, is talking about that your brother was a pikech, married to a woman, so he's married Matoida, and then he died, so you took over his marriage. You cannot divorce that woman. But if your brother was a chedesh, you definitely could, because we're not going to make this gezeda. Says he where it goes further. You should know that Chalukin Olav Chaveda, but Shimon Gamliel, as the Gemara explained, you could when he's a Medvar, sometimes it's coming to explain the opinion of Tanakama. Maybe they all agree to Rav Kahana. The Gemara says, no, you should know that Shimon Gamliel is arguing with the Tanakama. The Tanakama Rav Kahana Rav only suits Rav Shimon Gamliel, but according to Tanakama, you cannot put it in writing. Oh, we learn. It says Nishtis. What happens if she became? They married. They're both very healthy people, and then later on something happened, and she lost her mind. Nishetas. She became a shaita after she got married. So they married Mahatoida. Lo Yeti, you cannot divorce her. Now, why you can't divorce the Gemara concludes it's only Midrabanan, because when it's technically Mahatoida, you don't need her consent. If you don't need her consent, then what's the difference if she's a shaita or not a shaita? It's only Midrabanan. We don't want her to be. People will take advantage and exploit her because she's a shaita and she'd be single. Is lo yoti nischaresh who the husband became deaf and dumb, or if the husband became a shaykh, so he's married Ma'ataida, now he's not in a position to issue a get. Lo yoti ilamis, he cannot divorce her, and we add the word ilamis forever. What do you have to add the word ilamis forever? So the Gemara says, my ilamis. What's I said? What do you mean ilamis? Lav isn't it trying to say? Even though there is an option, no, can you write? Like Rav says, even though he cannot speak, he's deaf and dumb, he can still write it down. And yet you tell me you can't. You tell me you can't. So therefore, obviously, there's an opinion that argues Rav Shimon says you can write it down. Amar Papa says You're telling me, what Rabbi Yechon, you're saying, Rabbi Yechon, what do I need you to say? I know there's a Tana who argues because there's other Mishnah. Says the Papa, no. If Rabbi Yechon would not have said what he said in the Mishnah of Shimon Gamliel, we could have learned differently. How could we have learned? He loved Ashmin Rabbi Yechon. Rabbi Yechon would have told us, Hava Mina, I would have thought, Rashbag li Perusha time with the Tana Kamudasa. I would have thought, I don't know, nobody's arguing. Everybody was kind of that. And Shimon Gamliel is defining the Tana Kamu. What's shot over here when it says here lo yotzi olamis, and you're stressing the word olamis forever. What's the trying to my olamis? Maybe olamis is apagav the chazina le the chari. Even though we see that that we can see that he's fully aware of the faculties and he nods his head. Nodding is no good, but maybe writing is good. Maybe there's no opinion that they sense from Rosh Hashanah or inami, or maybe. The reason why he says Elamis is to tell you there's difference between the first part and the second part. The first part talks about her becoming a shaita, that's only midrabban. The second part, he becomes a shaita, that's mahatayda. And Elamis means mahatayda. But maybe you can write it down. So that's why Rabbi Yechon has to come and say, no, there is an argument with it tonight. Inami, because Rabbi Yitzchak, no, I mean Elamis for Rabbi Yitzchak to tell you that since they say it's Elamis, but the Reish is only midrabban. Why? A man can divorce his wife even though she became a shaita. Just like if she wouldn't be a shaita, you don't need her consent. So who cares if she's a shaita? So why do we say that you cannot divorce your wife became a shaita? You shouldn't have a minig hefker. Here we have a whole discussion in the Gemara whether writing is considered as talking. But in Halacha and other parts, we actually have a big machlekes of Givei and others. For example, Sfiras Omer, you write down the day of the Omer. Is that considered like accounting and you can no longer count? And other things, when you're writing down, well, you're not allowed to learn Torah before, you're not allowed to learn Torah before you say Birchas HaTorah. What happens if you're writing Torah? Is that like learning Torah verbally? So there's a big machlekes of Poskim. And maybe it relates back to this machlekes we have right here, if writing is considered speaking or not. We have two Tanaim who argue, and we have Rav Kahana Marav who said clearly that you could write, and writing is considered like speaking, which is the halacha. Anyway, interesting discussion. Next Mishnah says the Mishnah, let's say Amrullah, they tell this person who's a healthy person, or let's say a Shechimera, they say to him, Nichtev get l'ishcha. Now, just to bring you back into focus, we had a big argument with Rameir and Rabbi Yasi before. According to Rameir, if you tell two people, to write a get and give a get to my wife, they cannot pass it on to somebody else. But if you tell them to three people, then they become like a peasant and they have a right to appoint anybody they want. Rabbi Yasi says no. That in the case of the instructions of writing or giving a get, you cannot pass it on to anybody else because mili le'mimser l'shliach. If you gave them a divorce, he said, pass on to my wife, they can give as many shluchim as they want because it's something tangible to transfer to the next person. But if I'm just giving instructions just in the realm of words are not powerful enough that you can pass it on to somebody else. That's mili le'mimser l'shliach. And then we had a Shmuel who came along and said, but there's a middle case, which is where you gave them specific instructions. You told the shlich, I want you to go to this person and ask him to be the sefer. You go to these two people and ask them to be the Eidim. That is called Omer Imru. I told him to say. So Shmuel says clearly that Rabbi Yasi would be made in the case of, or at least he passes, the Gemara concludes that he argued Rabbi Yasi. Others say Rabbi Yasi would agree that if you tell them clearly instructions to give somebody else, that you empowered them. No, you gave over that koyach to them, so now they can pass it on somebody else. And the Gemara said, but Rabbi Yasi himself doesn't agree. Rabbi Yasi holds that even Imru, and we bring it out, we'll bring it here as well, that even if he told them, he cannot pass it on, because at the end of the day, I'm the Mishalech, they're just acting on my behalf, and they cannot, and the words stay with me, even the instructions, so they cannot pass anything on. Okay, with that introduction, let's go to this Mishnah. Amru, so we're going to try to work out who's the author of this Mishnah. Is it Rabbi Yasi or Rabbi Meir? There are two parts of this Mishnah. Part number one, Amrullah, they said to this person, healthy or somebody's dying, Nichter get lishtacha, should we write a get to your wife so that to avoid her from ending up with your brother? And he said, yeah, so write. He said to them, just write. He didn't say give it, he just said write to them. Amrullah Sefer, so they went ahead and they told the Sefer, instructed the Sefer, because he wrote it, Ulaedim to witnesses, because signed it. They did everything right, they wrote it and they signed it, they gave him the get to give to his wife. Because of the Nosla, he turned around and gave to his wife. How they get buckle, it's not good. It's not good. Now, it seems from the Mishnah, why is it good? Because he told them to write. What didn't he tell them? Give it to my wife. And because he told them to write, it's as if he wanted them specifically to write it. But if he would have said, Tanu, give it to my wife, it would have been good enough. Why would it be good enough? It's merely how can they pass it on to somebody else? So it must be talking about a case of 3 people and follows Rameir. That's what the Gemara initially is going to think. But then the Mishnah concludes, when it would be valid, unless he tells directly, there's no shliach passing on instructions. You directly tell the sefer to write and to the Eidim to sign, which is exactly Rabbi Yossi. That's on the beginning of the Mishnah. Seems the only problem is because he missed out to omitted Tanu, which is Rameir. And the conclusion is that the only way it works is if you give direct instructions. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. The only reason why it works is the loyam Tanu. The only reason why it works is he didn't say Tanu. But if he would have said Tanu, it would have been valid. They could pass on instructions. No, because he said, sorry, he wants, I want you guys to write it. It's as if to say, I want you. He's very makbid. I don't want you to tell anybody else. And what possible reason is that? I'm embarrassed for anybody else to know. You, I trust you. You know, you could be discreet. I don't want anyone else to know. So then everyone agrees. Then in that case, you have no right to pass it on to anybody else. But if he would have said clearly, give a get to my wife, and he didn't tell them directly, you must write it. So then they have every right to pass on somebody else. When, according to Meir, there were 3 people there. Now, so that's Meir. You could pass over words to a shliach. Look at the conclusion of the Mishnah. The only time that it's effective is that the husband has to directly speak to the sefer and tell him to write, or the witnesses to sign. That follows Rabbi Yossi. The Amr says, that words were not given over the shliach. Reisha Rameir v'sefer Rabbi Yossi. The Reisha Rameir and Rabbi Yossi. So yes. Reisha Rameir v'sefer Rabbi Yossi. Yeah, why not? And we have this on a number of occasions where the Gemara says that. And interesting, many times it's Abaye who says, I have no problem with changing the Mishnah, that this is Rameir, this is Rabbi Yossi. And then someone else comes along, or a brother or a papa usually, and says, no, or Rav Ashi, that we can work out the whole Mishnah one way. Here it's Abaye, and we had a few times already, where Abaye is the one that says, yeah, I have no problem. So sometimes Abaye has no other solution. So he says, yes, the beginning and the sefer is different. Sometimes he has a solution, and he'll give a solution without having to say it's the same person. Says the Gemara, Abaye says, cool, I made it. No, it's not the Reisha of a Sefer. I can learn this Mishnah, I can learn the time Mishnah I made. No. If the time Mishnah I made, what do you mean? Why tell them directly? There's another alternative. Tell them to know in front of the people. And the Lama to know. Our Mishnah is talking about a case he did not say to know. And the Mishnah's conclusion according to Meir is that even according to Meir, since he didn't say Tanu, the only way that it could be effective is if he gives direct instructions. When does a man say you can pass it on if he says Tanu in front of 3 people? Here he did not say Tanu. Says the Gemara, if so, the Mishnah is wrong. Why does the Mishnah say the only way that it could be effective is if he gives direct instructions? No, it could be effective if he says Tanu. So the Mishnah just said it's not effective unless he says Tanu. The Mishnah said until he says Tanu. Why the Mishnah is talking about a case he didn't say Tanu, but the Mishnah is trying to tell us. So when would it be effective? So why it's obvious it's effective if he gives direct instructions. Because how else is it going to work? So that obvious. Say a bigger chiddush. Is that what if he said Tanu? So Allah my skin and give another answer. Remember, when does a mayor say that you can pass it on if he's done in front of the best than 3 people? There were 3 people, only 2. That's why Tanu is not an option. The only way is to give direct instructions. The Gemara says again, it's still very obvious if you give direct instructions, it works. The Gemara just had a chiddush. But if you want to be effective with giving instructions to shliach to pass on, say in front of 3 people, give that option, which is a big chiddush. The Mishnah says, give to 3 people. Ella kula Rabbi Yossi. The entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. We're changing around. Not the entire Mishnah is Amei. The entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. The problem with saying it's Rabbi Yossi is the Mishnah says the problem is because he said as if to say, so we were medayik, we're referring, but what about extrapolating? What happened if it would have just said Tanu? It would be effective. That only words goes to Rabbi Yossi. So you know. You know what you were talking about even according to Rabbi Yossi. And according to Rabbi Yossi, the chiddush of Ksoivu is not the problem is he didn't say Tanu. The problem is he didn't say, I want you to give instructions to somebody else. Not that the Mishnah is out to be medayik, because he said Ksoivu, right. He didn't say Tanu. And he didn't say give it, that's a problem. That's not the problem at all. The reason why it's possible is because he didn't say, I want you to go ahead and appoint these people. He didn't, it was not a case of Ayman. He said, Imru, tell somebody else. And according to Rabbi words that cannot be transferable, but if he told him clearly, Imru, then it would be transferable. But if he would have told these two people, go tell that's the guy to be the Sefer, and tell those two people to sign, then Ayman would work, which is what Shmuel said a few days ago. Says the Gemara, so because he did not say Imru, the only way it can work is that he has to give direct instructions. Says the Gemara, so first of all, the same question. It's obvious if even according to if he told the Sefer and the Aiden directly, it should say a bigger chiddush. Even if he did not tell the Sefer directly, he told the Shleach, but if he told them specifically, I want you to inform that Sefer to write it for me. And if Aymer Imru, then it also works. That would be a bigger chiddush. Same question we had on saying the Mishnah Meir, say a bigger chiddush, the same problem. But apart from that, the problem we mentioned a few days ago, and that is what? Furthermore, in fact, we proved that Rabbi Yossi holds that there is no way you can have a shliach even if you give direct instructions. And how do we know that? Because we have a Mishnah, or the only opinion that can explain why the pshat in that Mishnah is if you follow Rabbi Yossi. And the only way we can say we follow Rabbi Yossi is that there's no alternative, there's no option that you can have a shliach involved. And what's the story? The story is as follows. It says in the Mishnah, Sefer 8 kosher. The Mishnah said that the writing of the Sefer and a single witness on the get is kosher. Now you read the Mishnah itself, you can think it means if there's Sefer, no, there's only one signature on the get, but the fact that the Sefer wrote it, obviously there were two people involved, the Sefer and the witness. Says Rabbi Yim, it's not pshat at all. No, it doesn't mean that the Sefer is writing. The Sefer was a witness, and there's another witness, and that's good. It's acceptable. Now, why is it acceptable? The only way it can be acceptable is if you follow Rabbi Yossi, who says, what do you mean? Because if you follow a maid that says that you can pass on, what happens if the husband gives instructions to these Adim and says, I want you to be, go find, let's say, two other Adim, go find two other Adim and instruct them to become Adim and then get the Sefer. Now they're very embarrassed. They're going to the Sefer and say, we want you to write the get. You're not asking the Sefer to be a signature. Well, you don't trust him. It's very embarrassing. So the Shliach is going to, I guess, amend or alter the instructions he received from the husband, and he will only appoint one aid. He'll turn to the Sefer, please write it, and also it'll be a big honor if you sign it. So we are worried according to the mayor, and that's why a Sefer made a decree, a Sefer can never sign. Because we don't know if the Sefer, the Sefer might have just heard it from the Shliach, and the Shliach has the right to appoint. But if you follow Rabbi Yossi holds that Mili Lememsa the Shliach, there's no way that the Sefer can sign unless the husband gave him direct instructions. If we see a Sefer signing, no problem, because he wouldn't have signed unless the husband told him directly. But if you hold that that there is a possibility, Sefer can be. If you hold that a shliach, there's a possibility of a shliach by saying imru. If so, we have the same problem. What happens? He gave instructions, direct instructions to shliach. I want you to get this person to Sefer and these two shluchim. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's valid, but they were embarrassed, so they told the Sefer to sign, even though their husband didn't say so. Come the same problem. Must be that according to Rabbi Yossi, there is no way in the world that a shliach can be the one to transfer the shlichus or pass it on to somebody else. The only possible way is for the husband directly to instruct the Sefer. So if a Sefer signs, there's no problem because the husband told him. Clearly, Rabbi Yossi doesn't believe in Imru. So back to the question, who's our Mishnah? Nothing then it'll come out a disaster. The Zimni, the Amrul, the Shnayim, Imru la Sefer. He told two people, go and tell the Sefer, Yichta to write. Plain and those two people to go ahead and sign. The Sefer, they're embarrassed for the Sefer that they're only using him to write the get and not giving him the cover of being an aid. So therefore, they're going to go ahead and tell the Sefer to sign as well. And the husband never said that. We go back to the original thing we said that Reisha Rameya v'Sefer Rabbi Yossi. In this case, Abaye would have been right if he would use his normal approach is that sometimes you have a Mishnah with two different authors and it's written in a very cryptic way as if it's all one, but it's actually two different authors. The beginning is Ameya and the end is Rabbi Yossi. That is, but there is actually a girsa that Abaye is the one that says that it's two different authors, and Rav is the one who tried to answer Kula Rameya. Anyway, Rav Ashi comes along and says, no, Kulo Rabbi Yossi, I can learn the entire Mishnah Rabbi Yossi, and he's building up. The first part of the Mishnah, he's telling you a case where, according to everybody, even according to the mayor, it's no good. Why is it no good? Because he didn't say Tanu. But of course, Rabbi Yossi is no good. And then he works his way up. Now what? That even if you did all the right things, it's still no good because you have to give direct instructions. And when this is a style, certain Tanoim, they build up the case. So they start with something which is obvious, and then you work your way up. Not to be medayik, this goes only according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi speaking, but first he starts off saying this case for sure it's no good because everybody, and even my colleague, my peer who argues with me agrees. Says he, I'm working my way up. If he didn't say true, even a mayor agrees. But if he did say true, it wouldn't work. Plus, if he didn't say to 3 people, even in front of 3 people, Rabbi Yossi says he cannot appoint a court. If he didn't give direct instructions, even if he gave direct instructions, it will not work. The only way the mission concludes is he has to tell the Sefer directly, and says you want to Tanya Kavasabashi, we actually the Braisa supported Rabashi's view. It says that Aimer Imru Rabbi Yossi also agrees that it's possible. It says Kosav Sefer Lishma. The Sefer wrote it properly. The Chasmu Eid Lishma wrote it properly. Afa Pisha Kosmu the Chasmu. They wrote it and they signed it. And gave it to him. And gave them. But they get bottle. The get is no good because the husband's instructions weren't direct. There is a machlekes if a husband actually has to, if the sefer is like a shliach of the husband or not. We had in Taisha a number of weeks ago. When does it become valid? Sheyishmu koile, that they have to directly hear, and it goes further than our Mishnah, that they have to hear the voice of the husband. Sheyemer l'sefer k'seif, it tells the sefer right, u'le'eid to aid him to sign. Now, what do you mean? You have to hear his voice. Yishmu to hear, lafukim and mandama to negate the opinion that says he has to hear directly from the husband, and because Shmuel said that Imru works if you gave a shliach instructions to pass it on, it would work, and there's an opinion that says that Rabbi Yossi agrees to that. No, it says no. You have to hear directly from the husband. Then it says Koila's voice, and not what, and not his writing. Lafukim of Kahana Amarav to negate of Kahana opinion. The name of Rav that writing, if he writes it down, is good enough. But to tell you that's not the case, that the halacha that we disagree with Rav, even though the halacha at the end is like a Yehuda Rav of Kana Rav, because we have Rav Shimon ben Gamliel who agrees with that as well. Have a good day.